Millionaire marries an obese woman as a bet and is surprised when Ethan Carter, a self-made millionaire with a reputation for arrogance, thrived on challenges. His wealth had bought him everything: cars, yachts, luxury vacations, but it had also turned him into a man who saw life as one big game. At 34, Ethan was a charming bachelor who surrounded himself with people eager to bask in his success. Yet, his charm hid a competitive streak that often crossed the line into cruelty. One evening, during an extravagant party at his Manhattan penthouse, Ethan's best friend Darren issued a challenge over cocktails and laughter. "I bet you don't have the guts to marry someone completely out of your league," Darren said, smirking. "Someone you wouldn't be caught dead with." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Define out of my league." Darren leaned in, his tone dripping with mockery. "Someone like her." He gestured toward a woman standing in the corner of the room, wearing a modest dress. She was larger than the women Ethan usually surrounded himself with. Her hair tied in a simple bun, her eyes downcast as she sipped water. Ethan glanced over and chuckled. "That's easy. What's the wager?" $1 million, Darren replied, his voice daring Ethan to take the bait. The room fell silent, the crowd awaiting Ethan's response. With a sly smile, he raised his glass. "You're on." Little did Ethan know, this reckless bet would lead to a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about love, respect, and himself. Ethan Carter wasn't the type of man to back down from a challenge. His life was a series of high-stakes gambles, and he always emerged victorious. Whether it was in business, sports, or his personal life, Ethan had built a reputation as a man who never lost. So when Darren dared him to marry an unconventional woman for $1 million bet, Ethan accepted without hesitation. To him, it was just another game to win. The woman Darren had pointed out at the party was Beatrice B. Thompson, an acquaintance of one of the guests. B was a quiet and unassuming woman in her early 30s, who worked as a librarian. She had been reluctantly dragged to the event by a friend, and was clearly out of her element, amidst the opulence and superficial glamour. Her plus-sized figure and simple attire made her an easy target for Darren's cruel sense of humor. After the party, Ethan decided to approach B with his usual charm and confidence. Finding her at the refreshments table, he struck up a conversation. "Enjoying the party?" Ethan asked, flashing a practiced smile. B looked up, surprised to be addressed by someone like him. "It's not really my scene," she admitted with a shy smile. Ethan laughed, his tone warm and inviting. "Mine neither, honestly. But sometimes you just have to play along." Their conversation flowed surprisingly well. B was intelligent and witty, with a sharp sense of humor that caught Ethan off guard. She wasn't like the women he usually dated, models and socialites who fawned over his wealth. B spoke her mind, and her grounded nature intrigued him. As the night wore on, Ethan couldn't shake the thought of how easy it had been to connect with her. But to him, this was still part of the bet. Winning her over would be a breeze, or so he thought. The next day, Ethan orchestrated a chance meeting with B at the local coffee shop she frequented. She was surprised to see him, but appreciated his kindness and genuine interest in her life, or at least what she thought was genuine. Ethan began courting B with the same intensity he approached everything in life, sending flowers to her workplace, taking her on thoughtful dates, and pretending to care deeply about the things she loved. B, who had spent most of her life being overlooked, found herself swept up in Ethan's charm. She couldn't understand why a man like him was interested in her, but his persistence wore down her reservations. Against her better judgment, she allowed herself to trust him. 3 months later, Ethan proposed in an intimate setting, presenting her with a stunning diamond ring. B, overwhelmed by the whirlwind romance, said yes, believing she had found her fairy tale ending. Little did she know, her new husband's motivations were far from romantic, and Ethan had no idea that his life was about to be upended in ways he couldn't have imagined. The wedding was a small and intimate affair, just as B had wanted. She didn't care for extravagance, and Ethan had gone along with her wishes, knowing it would help solidify his image as the doting, selfless husband. To him, it was all part of the plan. His friends, including Darren, attended the ceremony with knowing smirks, congratulating him not for love, but for his cunning execution of the bet. Ethan believed he had everything under control. He would play the role of the perfect husband for 6 months, win the $1 million wager, and walk away with his pride intact. But from the very first day of their marriage, things began to unfold in ways he hadn't anticipated. B moved into Ethan's luxurious penthouse in the city, a far cry from the modest apartment she had called home. She marveled at the panoramic views, the state-of-the-art appliances, and the sheer opulence of it all. But despite the grandeur, she remained unchanged. B insisted on cooking their meals instead of relying on the household staff. She decorated the sterile, minimalist space with personal touches. Bookshelves, handmade crafts, and family photos that brought warmth into the home. Ethan, used to living in a cold and calculated environment, found himself oddly comforted by the changes. B's presence, with her genuine kindness and down-to-earth attitude, began to soften the edges of his world. He couldn't understand it, but he started looking forward to their evenings together, sharing meals and conversations that felt refreshingly real. B was more perceptive than Ethan realized. She noticed the distance in his gaze at times, the way he seemed to overcompensate with grand gestures, and the moments when his charm felt rehearsed. But rather than confront him directly, B decided to approach their relationship with patience and quiet observation. She wasn't naive. She knew there was more to Ethan's intentions than he let on, but she wanted to give him the chance to show his true self. As weeks turned into months, Ethan found himself in unfamiliar territory. He had underestimated B's intelligence, resilience, and the quiet strength she carried. She wasn't intimidated by his wealth or impressed by his status, and she didn't hesitate to call him out when she felt he was being disingenuous. One evening over dinner, B confronted Ethan about the superficiality of his life. "You have all this," she said, gesturing to the penthouse, "but it feels so empty. When was the last time you did something that wasn't about money or winning?" Ethan bristled at the question, but her words lingered long after the conversation ended. He began to see his life through her eyes, a series of hollow victories and shallow relationships. The cracks in Ethan's facade deepened during a charity event B insisted they attend. Unlike the glamorous galas Ethan was used to, this was a modest affair at a local community center. B volunteered to help organize the event, and Ethan begrudgingly accompanied her. At first, Ethan felt out of place. surrounded by people who didn't care about his wealth or status. But as he watched B interact with the attendees, he was struck by how genuine and selfless she was. She spent hours talking to families, helping children with crafts, and ensuring everyone felt valued. For the first time, Ethan saw the kind of fulfillment money couldn't buy. During the event, an older woman approached Ethan and said, "Your wife is a remarkable woman. You're lucky to have her." Ethan forced a polite smile, but felt a pang of guilt. Was he lucky, or was he just a fraud, taking advantage of her trust for the sake of a bet? As the 6-month mark approached, Ethan began to feel the weight of his actions. He had fully expected to win the bet, collect his $1 million, and move on. But the thought of leaving B now filled him with unease. She had become more than just a pawn in his game. She had become the one person who made him question everything about himself. Darren, however, was not about to let Ethan forget the terms of their wager. Over drinks one evening, Darren brought up the bet with his usual smugness. "So, how's married life treating you? Ready to collect that $1 million? Ethan hesitated, a knot forming in his stomach. "It's complicated," he muttered. Darren laughed. "Complicated? Come on, Ethan, she's not your type." This was never meant to be serious. Ethan's jaw tightened as anger flared within him. For the first time, Darren's words felt wrong, cruel, and shallow in a way that Ethan could no longer stomach. He realized he had allowed himself to be influenced by people like Darren for far too long. One night, B stumbled across an old photograph of Ethan and his friends at a party. In the corner of the photo, she noticed Darren's arm draped around Ethan's shoulder, a mischievous grin on his face. Something about the image unsettled her, and when she asked Ethan about it, he grew uncharacteristically defensive. "Why do you want to know?" he asked, his tone sharper than intended. "Because I feel like there's something you're not telling me," B replied calmly. "I've trusted you, Ethan, but trust goes both ways." Her words cut through him like a knife. Ethan knew he couldn't keep the truth hidden any longer. That night, he confessed everything: the bet, Darren's involvement, and his initial motivations for pursuing her. B listened in stunned silence, her heart breaking as the truth unfolded. "So it was all a game to you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I was just another challenge?" "It started that way," Ethan admitted, his voice filled with regret. "But it's not like that anymore. You've changed me, B. You've made me see how empty my life was." B stood up, tears streaming down her face. "I can't believe I let myself trust you," she said, her voice filled with pain. "I thought you were different." Ethan reached out to her, desperate to make her understand. "B, please. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I've fallen in love with you. That's the truth." B stood frozen in the living room, Ethan's confession echoing in her mind. The weight of his betrayal and the sincerity in his voice clashed, leaving her torn between anger and heartbreak. She had always prided herself on seeing the good in people, but this felt like a calculated betrayal of her trust. "You love me?" B said, her voice trembling. "How do I believe that when this entire relationship started as a lie?" Ethan stepped closer, his usually confident demeanor replaced with vulnerability. "I don't expect you to believe me," he said softly, "but it's the truth. I've changed because of you. You've shown me what it means to care about something real, something beyond money or power. You've made me want to be a better person." B shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. You don't just get to say you've changed and expect everything to be fine, Ethan. This isn't a fairy tale. I know, Ethan said, his voice breaking, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to prove it to you. I'll tear up the bet, walk away from the money, anything. Just tell me what I need to do. Bea stared at him, searching his face for any sign of deception. She saw none, but the pain in her heart made it impossible to trust him fully. You don't understand, Ethan, she said quietly. It's not just about the bet. It's about how little you thought of me to make it in the first place. The days that followed were tense and filled with silence. Bea moved out of Ethan's penthouse and returned to her old apartment, determined to rebuild her life without him. Ethan, devastated by her departure, threw himself into self-reflection. He cancelled meetings with his friends, especially Darren, whose shallow influence he now saw as toxic. Ethan realized that his journey to redemption couldn't be about winning Bea back. It had to be about becoming the man she deserved, regardless of whether she forgave him. Ethan started volunteering at the charity event Bea had introduced him to, immersing himself in work that had nothing to do with profit or prestige. He donated anonymously to causes that supported underrepresented communities, including a scholarship fund in Bea's name. These actions weren't grand gestures to win her favor, but quiet steps to transform himself into someone worthy of respect. Meanwhile, Bea threw herself into her work at the library and focused on healing. Her friends rallied around her, encouraging her to move on, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Ethan. Despite his betrayal, she couldn't ignore the changes she had seen in him during their time together. The man, who once seemed so arrogant and shallow, had shown glimpses of depth and vulnerability, qualities she hadn't expected but couldn't forget. One evening, Bea received an unexpected call from Ethan. His voice was calm but earnest. Bea, I'm not asking for anything. I just need you to know something. What is it, Ethan? She asked, her tone wary. I've been working with the charity you love, he said. They're hosting a fundraiser next week, and I've arranged for a special exhibit. Something I think you'll want to see. Bea hesitated, unsure if she could trust his intentions. Why are you telling me this? Because I want to show you that I'm not the same man who made that bet, Ethan replied. Whether or not you believe me is up to you. Curiosity got the better of Bea, and she attended the fundraiser. The venue was transformed into a warm, welcoming space filled with community members and supporters of the charity. As she walked through the exhibit, she stopped in her tracks. Ethan had curated a gallery of personal stories from people whose lives had been changed by the organization. Photos, letters, and videos lined the walls, each one a testament to resilience and hope. At the center of the exhibit was a plaque bearing her name, the Beatrice Thompson Scholarship Fund, supporting second chances. Bea's eyes filled with tears as she read the stories of young women who had received scholarships in her honor. Ethan had taken her belief in second chances and turned it into something tangible, something that would outlast their relationship. Bea, a voice said behind her. She turned to see Ethan standing there, his hands in his pockets, looking both hopeful and unsure. I didn't do this to win you back. I did it because you were right. My life was empty, and you showed me what it means to truly care. I just wanted you to know that. Bea studied him, her heart heavy with emotion. You didn't have to do all this, she said. I know, Ethan replied, but I wanted to. For you, for them, and for me. Bea stood silently, the warmth of the room contrasting with the emotional storm swirling within her. She glanced back at the plaque bearing her name, the weight of Ethan's transformation settling into her heart. This wasn't the man who had treated their marriage as a game. This was someone who had stepped out of his comfort zone, unlearning years of arrogance and entitlement to become a person of substance. I don't know what to say, Bea admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. You don't have to say anything, Ethan replied, his tone steady. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Bea. I just wanted you to see that I'm trying to be the kind of person you thought I could be. For the rest of the evening, Bea wandered through the exhibit, reading the stories of people whose lives had been changed by the scholarship fund. She spoke with attendees who shared heartfelt gratitude for Ethan's contributions and kindness. It was clear that his actions weren't just performative. He had genuinely committed himself to making a difference. As the event wound down, Bea found herself outside on the terrace, gazing at the city lights. Ethan joined her, maintaining a respectful distance. They stood in silence for a while before Bea finally spoke. You really have changed, she said, turning to face him. I had to, Ethan replied. You showed me that the life I was living wasn't worth much, if it didn't mean anything to anyone else. Bea sighed, the weight of their shared history pressing down on her. I don't know if I can forget what happened, Ethan. You broke my trust in ways I didn't think were possible. I understand, he said, his voice filled with sincerity. And I'll carry that regret with me for the rest of my life. But if there's even a small chance that we can rebuild something, anything, I'm willing to fight for it. In the weeks that followed, Bea and Ethan began to slowly reconnect. Their conversations were guarded but meaningful, each one peeling back another layer of their complicated relationship. Bea was cautious, but she couldn't deny that Ethan's actions had spoken louder than his words ever could. Ethan continued his work with the charity, often inviting Bea to join him. She began to see the depth of his commitment, and her guarded heart started to soften. The Ethan she had fallen for, the man who had emerged from beneath the layers of arrogance, was finally coming into his own. One sunny afternoon, Ethan invited Bea to the community center for what he called a small gathering. When she arrived, she was greeted by dozens of people whose lives had been touched by the scholarship fund. As she walked through the crowd, Ethan stepped forward, holding a bouquet of her favorite flowers. Bea, he said, his voice trembling with emotion, I don't deserve a second chance, but I'm asking for one anyway, not as the man I used to be, but as the man I'm trying to become, with your help. Bea looked at him, her eyes welling with tears. Second chances are never easy, she said, a soft smile breaking through. But they're worth it. What would you do if someone you loved asked for a second chance? Would you forgive them? Or is trust too hard to rebuild? Share your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear your perspective.